So perhaps you've seen him. He is often to be found on the corner of Burbank and Whitsett, or Coldwater and Magnolia, or walking between those two places. At least that's where I often see him. He's a homeless man. He's about 5'5", rather large, round head, bald, and always in need of a shave, sometimes with more of a beard, sometimes with less. He's dressed in pants that come down to just a little bit over his ankles, wearing dark shoes. His pants are dark, his shirt is often dark, all looking in need of a wash. Sometimes he's muttering to himself, sometimes he's just sitting quietly. He poses no threat. He does not seem to be intent on doing any harm to anyone. And I've seen him about now for at least 2 or 3 years. Last summer, as you may recall, was a particularly brutal, hot summer. And I, coming from the gym on Coldwater and Chandler, LA Fitness, often have the routine of walking from the gym to the Walgreens to get a sufficient size bottle of Gatorade. So about a year ago, coming out of this Walgreens, having just purchased the single largest bottle of Gatorade I could possibly find, he was coming down the street. It must have been easily over 100 degrees. And as he passed me, I reached out and I said, "Sir, please take this." He extended his hand, he took it, and he walked away. A woman who saw this exchange turned to me and said, "My gosh, that was simply the most lovely thing that you did. What a wonderful gesture." And for a moment, I felt pretty good about myself. But it passed very, very quickly. Because I began thinking, was that really such a wonderful thing to do? Was that such a lovely gesture on my part? I had plenty of money in my wallet. I simply turned around again to go get another bottle of the largest Gatorade that I could possibly find. Was this really such a good deed? Was this a mitzvah? We say the world, Al Shlosha Devarim ha'olam omed. Upon 3 things the world stands. Al HaTorah, Al HaAvadah, Al Gimilut Chasadim. Upon Torah, upon prayer, and upon deeds of loving kindness. So we've prayed today. We've studied Torah today. Was this a deed of loving kindness? Was this a deed upon which the world stands? I don't think so. I don't think this really was, on my part, an act of chesed. And here, let me have you consider the following. Imagine that you're walking down the street and you turn to one side and you see a person carrying a heavy burden coming up next to you. And you're walking in the same direction as that person. Is it really an act of gimilut chesed? Is it really an act of loving kindness to say, "Hey, let me help you with that"? I would argue that it is not. On the contrary, an act of chesed is when you're walking in one direction and you see someone carrying a burden coming in the other direction, and offering to help will mean that you have to turn around. You have to inconvenience yourself. You have to stretch. When you make that offer, that's an act of chesed. To not help someone carrying a burden, walking in the same direction of you, does not make you a Baal Chesed, does not make you one who is doing a deed of kindness. It just means that you're not a terrible, thoughtless, cruel, and narrow person. It just means you're nice. It just means you're decent. But being decent and being good are not the same thing. Being good requires that we stretch, that we put ourselves out to more than just the barest minimum of discomfort and irritation. And that is why when we look at this week's Torah portion and we look at Noah and we compare him with Abraham, we understand why it is that our tradition embraces Abraham as our primary descendant and not Noah. For look at their actions. Noah is told that God is going to bring a flood, wipe out the world, and he's told to build an ark. And what does Noah do? Yes. I did not pay for that. But I will afterwards. Because he's absolutely right. From the mouths of babes, well, not babes, but from the mouth of a young man, exactly right. You are exactly right. What does Noah do? He just does what he's told. He goes, he builds an ark, he waits for the rain to come, and by the way, it's raining, and God has to say to him, dude, get on the ark. Right? He doesn't reach out to people. He doesn't seek to save people. He doesn't stretch himself in any significant way for another human being. Abraham, on the other hand, 99 years old, has a circumcision, sitting at his tent in the heat of the day, sees 3 people walking by, and runs out to them to offer them shelter, to offer them food and drink, to bring them in to his tent. That is an act of chesed. That is why, in the mystical tradition in Kabbalah, it is Abraham who is identified with the sphira of chesed. He's seen as the embodiment of it, because to do chesed requires that we stretch ourselves. Beginning of this week's Torah portion, we have a line. When it's describing Noah, it says, he was an ish tzaddik tamim bedorotav, which is literally translated is he was a righteous and blameless man, but the key word for the rabbis, bedorotav, in his generation, implying that if he were in any other generation, he would not be considered righteous. So if we were to translate this verse in a more colloquial way, what we would say is, Noah, yeah, he was a decent bloke, but no more. He was no more than but a decent person. And the world cannot just stand on decency alone. It's not enough. In his book, very famous book, well-known book, Jim Collins wrote, called Good to Great, Why Some Companies Make the Leap and Others Don't. He postulates that at least 2 primary qualities that companies have to take them to the next level, to go from good to great, is that they make conscious choices and they are disciplined. And I would suggest, similarly, that if we want to go from decent to good, we have to do the same. If we want to go from being nice to being people who engage in acts of loving kindness, we have to make conscious choices. We have to be aware. We have to get up in the morning and say, today I will avail myself of an opportunity to do a sustaining act of loving benevolence for my fellow human being, because it doesn't come naturally. Being decent comes naturally. I have a sort of a fake rule. I say that 90% of the time, 90% of all of us are decent people. And we are programmed to be this way. We are genetically wired to be this way, because our decency allows us to get along. And going back in terms of our own evolution, getting along created a group cohesion, and we survived better as a group than as individuals. But getting along is not enough. In our day and age, getting along is not one of those things upon which the world can possibly stand. And if we're to change our behavior, we have to make conscious choices. We have to say, I will be good. I will actively seek out the opportunity to do something that stretches me for another human being. And we have to be disciplined about it. We're great with spasms of kindness. But that's not enough either. Because in a spasm, we are reacting to the world around us, to a tragedy that we see unfolding before us. But to do good requires the discipline of each and every day, each and every hour, saying to myself, where will that opportunity come? We need to train ourselves in the same way that an athlete works out and creates muscle memory, so that our default setting is to do good. The fact that we are decent confuses us, because we confuse being decent and nice with being good, and they're not the same thing. And in that confusion, we delude ourselves. We delude ourselves into thinking that we are actually good people. I hate to break it to you. I am not a good person. You are not good people. We're decent people. But we're not good. Not yet. Because good requires effort. And it requires discipline. And with that conscious choice that we can make, and with that discipline, we can avail ourselves of opportunities as they present ourselves within our community. I just want to mention 3 that are coming up here at Adat Ariel. When you leave services today, we have instituted making on a monthly basis 100 peanut butter and jelly sandwiches that then get distributed to food pantries in our neighborhood. So before we go and feed ourselves, take a moment, a small stretch. We're going to be going to the Farber Auditorium for the Kiddush. On the way there, you'll see to your left in the LeBeau Outdoor Chapel, table set up. Make some sandwiches. We do this every month. You can come back next month and do it again. Mitzvah Day is coming up next Sunday. Mitzvah Day is a valley-wide program whereby we as a community, both here at Adat Ariel and throughout the valley, present opportunities for all of us to do some good. I know it's inconvenient. I know we have other things we'd like to be doing on Sunday. So would I. But to be good requires to inconvenience ourselves. And we are also going to be beginning, the beginning of November, a 13-part class following services, following the Kiddush luncheon, on how to be a spiritual warrior, how to make the conscious effort to do the good. Because studying is part of the discipline that we need to build up within ourselves, both in the act of studying and in the content, in order to go from decent to good. These are but 3 opportunities of many that we offer and that are available in other venues of your lives and of my life. And for the world's sake, I hope you will avail yourselves of those opportunities. In the Talmud, we read about the tradition of the Lamed Vavniks, the 36 mention, the 36 people of righteousness who exist on this planet at any given time. And according to tradition, without these 36 people and without their acts of loving kindness, life on this world would simply implode under the weight of our selfishness, our anger, our ignorance, and our greed. Rabbi Rami Shapiro, the author of the book that we're going to be using for this spiritual warrior class, takes a slightly less literal view. And he says, don't think of it as really 36 individuals. Rather, understand that 36 people doing acts of chesed represent the tipping point for maintaining human life on this planet. And that at any given time, 36 people are practicing hesed, are practicing deeds of loving kindness at any given moment right now. And it changes because no one can do hesed all the time. But, he asks, what about the next moment? And he writes, can you really afford to let your very existence and the existence of the rest of the world rest on the shoulders of someone else? We all have a role to play in enabling the world to stand. And one of the most important lessons that we can take away from this week's Torah portion is that being decent will never hold back the floods. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.